buddy Keith, East Village Wine Geek here. I'm suited up. Underneath is my Star Wars t-shirt, but that's not important today. What's important is I'm supporting something called Sud De France. This is an organization that celebrates the wines of the southern part of France. More specifically, the Languedoc-Roussillon. I've been invited to a couple wine tastings that involve these wines because they're trying to promote them, and I think that this is a very important place in the world for wine. It's a very special place in the world for wine. So I'm going to do a couple videos about the Languedoc-Roussillon because there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of history and it's a little bit complex. So we're going to do a little history lesson, and then after we're done with that, then we're going to do a couple more videos about the specific areas of the Languedoc-Roussillon. Languedoc-Roussillon. This is an area in the southern part of France. The thing about the Languedoc-Roussillon is it's a very fascinating place. It pretty much resides on the coast of the Mediterranean, and it goes a little bit inland. This is one of the most ancient areas of wine. The Greeks and the Romans brought wine vines to this area way back in the day, and they came to this one town called Narbonne. A lot of places in the world have ancient wine history, but this is a very special place because of that sort of entrance of wine culture into a place that has taught the world how to make wine. Languedoc-Roussillon is the largest wine-producing region in the world. Now, in the history of French wine, Languedoc has always had a prominent position on the stage. They have to compete with Bordeaux and Burgundy and Champagne and all these other more noble areas and more noble appellations in France. But even though that's been the case, Languedoc has always produced a bunch of wine. It has been the bane of its existence, and it is also now becoming an advantage for the region. See, what happened is back in the day, this area was celebrated for its wine. During this part of history, the Languedoc-Roussillon was basically meant to mass produce not insipid wine, but wine that wasn't very deep and complex and something to think about. It was just a place to make wine that people drink every day, and it was known as that. In the late 1800s, the phylloxera thing came about. Now, I did a whole thing on phylloxera, which I will refer to you below this video. We'll put the other one up. But when phylloxera came around, all of Europe was going crazy. They didn't know how to eradicate this problem. The one school, the university that was researching on how to get rid of this louse was located in the Languedoc, in an area called Montpellier. Now, this is a very interesting point in Languedoc's history because what happens is, because of the proximity of the research, a lot of the experimentation was happening in the Languedoc-Roussillon. Now, when they finally found out that they could take American rootstock and graft it onto European rootstock to get rid of the louse, it all started happening in Languedoc. So by the time Bordeaux, Burgundy, and other appellations in France started using this grafting, the Languedoc was thriving. So it had a little upsurge. And even though it was daily wine that wasn't supposed to be thought about and just drunk, it started to gain a little bit of popularity. Now, but while this is happening, Languedoc did have some noble appellations, which I'll talk about in other videos. But as you can kind of tell, Languedoc has always been in flux. It's always been a wine region that is being insulted and then celebrated, and then insulted and then celebrated. And then the 1970s comes around. Now, at this point, a very important thing is happening in the world of wine. In California and in Paris, a competition happens called the Judgment of Paris. It's a watershed moment for California wine. Now, the United States makes wine, France makes wine, and we are now on par with some of the best wines in the world. Now, at this time, Languedoc is still doing very well, but then the 1980s comes around. In the 1980s, a bunch of really rich Texas oil men start getting obsessed with these cult wines that are happening in California. They got a lot of money, so they fly on over to the Christie's auction over in London that Michael Broadbent has revived, and they start buying very expensive bottles of Bordeaux. This is where Bordeaux and Burgundy and cult Zins and cult Cabs, very expensive wine, becomes the fashion. So good old Languedoc gets thrown away, back into obscurity, still making a bunch of wine, but basically, just not as important as everything else. In 1985, There's an area called Roussillon. Roussillon was once owned by the Spanish. It's right next to the Pyrenees. They took Languedoc and Roussillon and made it one administrative department called the Languedoc-Roussillon. That's why at our wine shop we have Languedoc-Roussillon as one appellation. Now, this is where it gets complicated. It's a very large area of wine. There's a lot of stuff going on there. There's a certain list of grape varietals that make up the majority of this area. And in the next video, I'm going to talk all about those grape varietals. We're going to go into different parts of the Languedoc-Roussillon. From 1985 to the 1990s, something's going on. We've merged two departments together. We're starting to get into, we're starting to kind of focus a little more on this amazingly ancient area of wine. And then other winemakers from around the world, especially from Australia, go to California. In the late 1980s, early 1990s, they see that what's happening in California is we're making wines from single varietals, and that's becoming very popular. So these guys had this idea, let's go down to Languedoc-Roussillon and try to talk these winemakers into doing single varietal wines so they can refresh their region and come back onto the American and global market. Some winemakers in Languedoc-Roussillon said, yes, thank you, I would love that help. Some said, absolutely not. There are, at this point, still noble appellations existing in Languedoc-Roussillon, which we'll talk about later. So, the 1990s happens, and from 1990s until around 2005, an evolution started happening. People started making more single varietal wines, and in the late 1990s and early 2000s, we started seeing wines from Languedoc-Roussillon on our wine shelves. They weren't as important as the Bordeaux's and the Burgundies. They weren't seen as much as the Bordeaux's and the Burgundies, but they were beautiful, and they were between $8 and $12. So, here we are now, at a time in Languedoc-Roussillon where it is still evolving. It's a region that's in flux. It's ancient, it's been around for a long time, it's the largest in the world, it makes a lot of wine, and it's had some problems going. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride as far as production is concerned, but now we care more about it because we have an awareness of wine here in the United States, and especially in New York City. There is a myth out there that this wine shop has been built on breaking down. Wine does not have to be expensive to be good. And a lot of people feel that French wine is that. It has to be expensive to be good French wine, right? No, it does not. And one of the best ways to introduce yourself to French wine is Languedoc-Roussillon. These wines are made from really great varietals that everyone loves: Syrah, Grenache, a little grape called Mourvedre, and a grape called Carignan, which again we'll get into. But they're soft, they're smooth, they're peppery, they can be full-bodied, but they're all very approachable. They're great to bring to a dinner, they're crowd pleasers, and this is the way to introduce yourself to French wine. So, in the next couple videos, we're going to talk about Languedoc-Roussillon and how diverse it is. We're going to get into microclimates, we're going to get into appellations, different kinds of wacky grapes, and this idea that the Languedoc-Roussillon feels they were doing bubbly wine before champagne. What's that all about? Sud De France.